find my Zoom. Can everybody see that? Nope.
Not yet.
And is there a way we can, in the future, get the agenda sent to everybody beforehand, just so that we're not having to put it in chat and then pull it up separate? And that way we can also have questions, comments, concerns ready to go before the meeting.
Mr. Ortiz, going forward, Confluence will take over with the agendas and we'll get all of those out, minimum of 5 and normally 7 days in advance of every meeting for exactly that reason. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I'm going to put it in the chat. There we go. Added it to the chat for folks.
Something else we need to talk about too is if we have a list of people's preferred email addresses, so that they can have access to this stuff, because I'm always having to request access through the main ledge email that I use. And so that just seems like something that should also be taken care of or been taken care of. So I can't access.
We will take care of that. We will do a follow-up email. It'll probably come from either myself or Carrie here at Confluence, and we'll make sure we get everybody's email addresses that you would prefer to be communicated with and have access to any online documents.
Thank you.
I also I changed permissions, so you all should be able to view it now.
Okay.
Mr. Ortiz, if you can call us to order, and then we'll go over some norms and expectations, and then we'll dive into the substance.
Okay. Being the vice chair and the only one that's here, I call us to order.
Wonderful. Thank you, Representative
Go ahead,
Ortiz.
Take it from here. I recognize Barrick. You go ahead.
For those I haven't met personally, my name is Barrick Abramson. I'm with Confluence Policy and Strategy Group. With my colleague, Carrie Steele, we'll be facilitating and supporting all of you. Before we dig into the substance of the meeting, I just want to lay out some norms that we would ask everybody to follow as we all come together. Number one, if you are not a member of the DORA staff or a member of the task force, we would ask you to go off of video so that the task force members can focus on seeing one another and engaging in conversation. We will reserve time at the end of the task force's discussion for any public comment for those who would like to weigh in on the discussions or offer their thoughts. Next, members of the task force and members of the public, when you're called on or when you open up the mic to speak, if you would say your name before speaking so everybody knows who is speaking. And the other thing that we would ask everybody to make sure this remains accessible to everybody is to minimize, if not completely eliminate, your use of the chat box. For those using screen readers or other accessibility, it can just become very distracting. So we're going to try to keep all of the conversation on microphones where people can speak. If you need additional accommodations or would like to request them, please feel free to email myself or Carrie, and we'll make sure we do our best to meet those issues. Does anybody have any questions about the norms before I lay out some of how we're going to approach today? Okay, hearing none, and I will be transparent. We just got on board, so we're getting quickly up to speed. Going into our next meeting, we're going to work with all of you to see if we can agree on a set of formal norms and agreements of expectations of how we're all going to interact as we do this work. We know there's going to be some discussions with some passions and some different points of view. At the highest level, what we're going to ask everybody are things like own your own opinion. Come ready to discuss the topics of the day. Make sure you're spending time listening and hearing others rather than just preparing your own response to it. And we're going to ask people to do things like disagree without being disagreeable. And finally, this one's a little personal for me. I'm going to ask you to let the facilitators facilitate. I assure you, we will make sure that all voices are raised and we find ways to make sure that all opinions and perspectives are heard, but we really do need to navigate these conversations carefully. As far as today's conversations, I want to emphasize that we're here to function in an advisory capacity. We're going to make recommendations to the governor's office, who will have the final say on members of the subcommittee. But I know you all have spent a lot of time looking through applications, voting on all of those. So we're going to go through all of those. Going into it, you're probably aware we didn't have a perfect slate where everybody agreed, here's the one's going to fill these 4 slots and these other 4 slots. In some cases, we have ties. In some cases, we have things like 5 or 7 people for 4 slots, and in some we have some open slots. What I am going to do is go through these subcommittee by subcommittee and share with this group where we are and where it looks like we need to have conversations. As we go through, what I would like to ask this group's consent for is where we have those individuals who have been nominated or have applied and been voted for and already have a majority of the votes. If you all would be okay consenting to move those forward while we focus on the other gaps or the places where we don't have a quorum. So let me put that on the table first. Does anybody object to the idea that where a name or names already have a majority of votes, we set those as names that we will be recommending and we focus on those where we don't yet have a majority? Are there any objections to that approach? Mr. Ortiz.
Point of clarification. I just want to make sure again that you guys, because again, not everyone had access to their preferred email that they used, right? So I didn't have access to everybody's bio, and I just filled out something with the people that I already knew, and then I filled out again something last night once I finally did get access. I just want to make sure that you counted and it's accounted for the second one. If not, then we need to do a live discussion on where and vote live, because if you don't have the most accurate, up-to-date information, then I'm not going to be okay with pushing those forward.
I understand. And I'm going to ask Ginny to clarify. I'm going off of information that was as of about 90 minutes ago, and I'll be reading off those names. But Ginny, to the representative's question, we have the most up-to-date information in these tallies?
We do, Representative Ortiz. I got your final votes about 6:30 this morning, and then just just deleted the row that we had from yesterday. So yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. That was my only concern. Appreciate it.
Okay. Yeah. All right, seeing no other comments or questions, I'm going to move us forward. Before I do, and these are names I will repeat as we go throughout the conversation, we have 12 names of applicants who did not specify a subcommittee. These are not in any order, but I want to list these names and I will repeat them. And I'm trying to avoid the chat, but if you'd like me to put them in there, I'm happy to. But the following names were not voted on, and they did not specify a subcommittee. Brian Grew, Chandon Hinton, Cliff Moores, Courtney Sledge, David Bolin, Deanna Rumsey, Kari Easterly, Lindsay Ann Mondolini, Maria Mesa, Sarita Parikh, Steve Kionas, I believe, excuse me on the pronunciation, and Vicky Hagan. Mr. Ortiz.
So I thought there was a section at the end of the form where it had an entire list that even though they couldn't be voted for or didn't show up in those specific slots for those task force, that we would vote to see if they should be considered. Are those the names that you listed? Is that the names that you just listed, or did you list all the names?
That is those names, Mr. Ortiz.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to start us with the Outdoors Committee. Basic access to Colorado outdoors, to identify barriers to primary access to and the enjoyment of the Colorado outdoors for persons with disabilities, and make recommendations addressing those barriers. We have 2 categories of people that we are to make recommendations. Number 1, 4 members who represent the adaptive outdoor recreation users, adaptive outdoor recreation programs, and adaptive trails, veteran service organizations that serve veterans with a disability, and disability rights advocacy organizations. For those 4 members, we had 2 applicants who each received 4 votes. Jennifer Mendenhall, and Curtis Garrett. Are there any objections to moving those two forward?
Can someone give a brief synopsis of their background, please?
Jennifer, would you be able to jump in and do that from the Gov's office?
Yes, happy to. So, sorry, just loading. Jennifer Mendenhall, she is employed with UBS Financial. She is a full-time caregiver as well for her daughter. And she would like to serve on the Disability Rights Task Force to bring a voice to the Western Slope, rural and underserved communities. I'm so sorry, it's taking a second to load.
Mm-hmm.
So, in terms of the advocacy work that she does for her daughter, she has worked with Colorado Department of Education, Transition Leadership Institute, as a presenter for a technology journey, the story of Cody's life. She also did the same presentation in 2022 at an expo in Houston, Texas. And she volunteers with the National Association of People Supporting Employment First.
Okay. Then I'd have a question for those that voted for, because again, the criteria was that the person represents an adaptive outdoor rec, trails, or veteran service organization. So my first question is, like, I don't know her personally, so how does she meet that criteria? And the second question is, why was she such a standout in y'all's mind? Because when I think of adaptive sports programs, and again, this might just be people not being familiar, I'm thinking of Telluride Adaptive Sports, I'm thinking of Adaptive Adventures, I'm thinking of BOEC, Breckendoor Outdoor Education Center, I'm thinking of Telluride Adaptive Sports. These are the programs that work with people living with a disability that get us outdoors and active. So again, with that in mind, I would like to hear from those that voted for her and figure out why she would, like, one, why she fits the criteria, and two, why she is a standout to y'all.
Mr. Ortiz, just for sake of process, to clarify, our intention was to see if people object. Is it my understanding then that you're objecting to moving forward?
I want those, well, again, we have to have discussion. We're not just going to vote without discussion. That's a point of order too. So like, before we vote to move her forward, I would like those two questions answered. That'll affect whether I object or not.
Okay.
And I'm sorry if I could interject again, Representative Ortiz. She has a background. She has her Bachelor's of Science in Natural Resource Recreation and Tourism from Colorado State University, and was previously involved working in Parks and Recreation as a recreation coordinator, manager, and director for communities in Colorado and Alaska.
Okay.
Do we have any members of the task force who would like to weigh in on the strengths that you saw in Ms. Mendenhall?
Well, first question, I'd like a point of order again. I'd like to like clarify then, based on that answer that was just given, that she has no direct experience with a direct adaptive sports programs. Yes, with the Department of Tourism and Outdoor Trails, but it sounds to me like the answer is no. Or with any specific veteran service organization.
I'm not seeing anybody who disagrees with your point or who is adding anything that would clarify that, Mr. Ortiz.
Okay, then I'm comfortable with going on to the second one on why she was a standout to people that did vote for her.
Would anybody who voted in favor of recommending Ms. Mendenhall like to speak to the strengths you saw in her fit for the outdoor access subcommittee?
This is Julie Riskin. Was this one of the ones where there weren't a lot of choice, where like there was only two? Or no, okay. Because I know there were some that were only two, and I also know there were a lot of applicants in the list where people were kind of saying they represented disability, but it was only on a personal level. Like it was only like, I have a kid with a disability. They didn't note any organizations. So I just noticed that theme throughout. I just couldn't remember if this was one of the ones that didn't even was not even fully slated. I don't believe I voted that way because I noticed that on a lot of these.
And Ms. Reskin, to your question, we have 4 applicants who received votes in total for this committee. Ms. Mendenhall, Curtis Garrett, Sharon Campbell, and John Broadbent.
Those are the only 4 that received votes. Say that name again.
Jennifer Mendenhall, Curtis Mead Garrett, Sharon Campbell, and John Broadbent.
Then I'm questioning whether my votes were counted because I know that I voted for Christina Erickson.
Can I? Oh, I have another question.
Yes, Ms. Raskin, and then I'm going to ask Ginny to come in so we can check on our vote tallies as well.
So, you know, that list of people that didn't specify a committee, I thought what we were supposed to do is say which of them, if any, should be considered. And then there was a thing on the bottom to write information. And I wrote names that said like, this person would be good for outdoors. This person would be good for this. Like there was a guy who was very, very connected with outdoor recreation that was on that list that I thought would be really good. And so, but there wasn't a way to vote for him on that. So that's why I'm a little confused about how, if we fill this process and then go to that list, the slates will all be filled. So,
Yeah. So Julie, in response to that, so what I did is I counted solid votes of the task force where people voted. Where there were ties, I then brought in the lieutenant governor's votes, since by statute, she, breaks the ties. And so that then added the additional vote, which sometimes didn't break the tie, made the tie worse. But so that was kind of where Barrick, I believe, was coming from in the beginning, that ultimately the people that rose to the top were the ones who had the most votes. There were some categories where people didn't vote and, they were blank. And Representative Ortiz, I can pull up our folder where we got the votes as well.
I mean, I wrote a paper copy of my vote, so this is not just me guessing. Like I know who I voted for and what place I voted for them in.
Sure. Yeah, and I'm not suggesting otherwise. But what I did do was take the full votes from the votes that we had and then added the LGs when there were ties to be used, because that's by statute how she is listed. Does that make sense, Julie?
If I could just layer in, Julie, in looking at the list that I read earlier, there are several that have outdoor marked next to them. As Ginny said, these weren't names that would be voted on since they hadn't applied for a specific committee, but those names that I do intend to be part of this discussion to see as we fill these slots include Deanna Rumsey, Lindsay Ann Mandolini, and Vicky Hagan, who there were notes that these may be your notes suggesting for outdoor.
no.
No.
My note, I think one of them, I think I did suggest Deanna, but I think there were some others I suggested, but
so yes, and part of that, because Julie, they weren't like a full vote in the statutory category, they were suggestions. My thought was that that's then part of the discussion that you would bring to this conversation. And
that's fine. Yeah, I just wasn't sure how. I was just kind of responding to Representative Ortiz saying like, well, why are people voting here? And it might be that, because I just didn't know if that was connected. So if people felt that they couldn't suggest some of these other people.
So just point of order, I'd like to take it back to kind of the justification for Jennifer. Like that's what point of discussion we're on before we move forward. So I've not heard anybody yet come forward and that voted for her.
I have not either, Mr. Ortiz. We're sitting her with 4 votes to recommend moving forward.
Well, if no one's willing to come forward and publicly testify as to why they're supporting her, then I'm going to object.
Understood.
Okay, with that,
Well,
I mean, That being said, I'm going to
Understood the
object.
Yeah, understood. Your objection is noted. So what we will do is we go through any final counts for those where there is not agreement and consent. We will do a roll call vote on each one of those to give everybody a chance to vote. The next name I have with 4 votes is Curtis Garrett. Is there an objection to moving Mr. Garrett forward? Mr. Ortiz, did you have questions about the Curtis Garrett's?
Nope, he was one of the individuals I voted for, and part of it is the fact that he has been active in advocating for disability rights, and he's got the legal background, because if we're talking about access to the outdoors and creating certain mandates around ski lifts or around trail entrances, it's going to be important to have someone that has a legal mind and has worked in that space to be able to weigh in on these issues. So
Understood. So with 4 votes, we have a majority there. Or do we have any objections to moving Curtis Garrett forward as a recommendation of the committee? And we will take a formal vote on all of these after we go through all of them. I just want to see which ones we can move forward and where we need to do discussion. Okay, hearing no objections to Curtis Garrett, we'll place that name to be moved forward pending a final roll call vote. We do have 2 more individuals who each received 3 votes. That is not a majority, but they are the next highest vote getters. That is Sharon Campbell and John Broadbent. Would any task force members like to weigh in as to whether you would like to make a motion to move them forward? Mr. Ortiz.
I'll make a motion to move Sharon Campbell forward. Is there a second? Okay, we can go into discussion too. Seconded by Julie Reskin. I saw her hand raised, seconded by Julie Reskin. So Sharon Campbell, I've known for a long time, since he's been injured at Craig Hospital. Him and I got injured around the same time. And he's an incomplete quad injury. So started off in a power chair, and through rehab and through therapy, he's able to move around, sometimes with or without a mobility device. He's active in CrossFit. He's active in exercise. He's got a background in kinesiology and exercise. So I think he's going to, and he obviously participates in adaptive sports, whether we're talking about adaptive CrossFit or others. So I think he would be a valuable voice in making sure that that is heard.
Thank you, Mr. Ortiz. Are there questions about Sharon or any objections? Seeing and hearing none, we'll move Sharon forward together with Curtis Garrett, while we still have Jennifer Mendenhall to be determined. John Broadbent. Members of the task force want to weigh in?
Oh, point of order. I confused John Broadbent with Curtis Garrett. So Curtis Garrett has been involved in adaptive sports. John Broadbent is who I thought of with a legal mind. So just changing it over and reiterating, that's why I chose John. So I'm going to move John Broadbent.
Okay. Is there a second to Mr. Ortiz's motion to move Mr. Broadbent forward? Ms. Reskin seconds. Any objections? Seeing none, we now have 3 names moved forward: Curtis Garrett, Sharon Campbell, and John Broadbent. We do need to, Mr. Ortiz.
I'm going to make a motion that we replace Jennifer Mendenhall with Christina Erickson.
Would you like to speak to Ms. Erickson's background?
Well, I need a second first, and then we can have a discussion.
Very well. Is there a second? Ms.
Seconded
Reskin.
by Julie Reskin. Okay. So the thing that I appreciated the most about Christina is that she has a background working with city and ADA programs within the city of Denver. The other thing is she was a policy and advocacy associate with the United Spinal Association. For anyone that's lived in this space, they know what a large and impactful group that is when it comes to the space, especially when we're talking spinal cord injuries, those that deal with paraplegia and illnesses. So it could be spina bifida, it could be paraplegia, it could be muscular dystrophy, it could be any of those. Not only that, but she's also associated with adaptive sports programs. Climbers Fest organizer, for example, Adaptive Climbers Fest. And I have been involved in the adaptive climbing community. They're very active. They're very robust and great organization. So I think her voice and her network would be a much better fit, since no one is willing to speak for Jennifer Mendenhall. So that's kind of why she sticks out. She's not just a caregiver. She's been involved in the space in city government. So that's a valuable asset. She's been involved with an organization nationally that's been involved in fighting for disability rights. And she's also directly tied to adaptive sports events and programs.
Mr. Ortiz, since we're still getting up to speed on our team, can you repeat her last name for me so we capture it correctly?
Christina Erickson.
Erickson, thank you very much. Is there anybody else who would like to speak to Ms. Erickson or to offer, who has questions?
This is Julie. I don't know that I voted for her, but I like that she did this in 2 states, that it's not just Colorado. I thought that was good.
Mr. Ortiz, are you making a motion to include Ms. Erickson as the 4th member with Garrett, Campbell, and Broadbent?
Yes, I made a motion to replace Jennifer Mendenhall with instead put in Christina Erickson. So that's the motion that's on the table.
Do we have a second to Mr. Ortiz's motion?
That was already seconded. That's how we got.
It was,
to the
okay,
discussion.
thank you.
Yeah, so now we have to take a vote on the
Yep.
motion.
Carrie, I believe you have the list, or actually I've got the list of names here. I'm going to go through and do a roll call vote. The motion is to replace Ms. Mendenhall with Ms. Erickson. Mr. Stone.
Yes.
Mr. Stone, yes. Mr. Ortiz.
Yes.
Mr. Ortiz, yes. Is Ms. Harpole on the phone?
Yes.
Yes.
And I also say yes.
Ms. Harpole, yes. Elizabeth Moran.
Yes.
Elizabeth Moran, yes. Mark Honan for the Lieutenant Governor.
Barrett, point of order. I think that I would only come in as a vote if there's
I
a tie.
apologize. You are correct. Thank you. Representative Armagos, did I see you join?
Yes.
And just to clarify, you were answering my question, but are you also voting yes?
Yes and yes.
Okay, thank you. And Julie Reskin. Okay, so for the outdoors, we are moving at this time to move to our final vote would be Curtis Garrett, Sharon Campbell, John Broadbent, and Christina Erickson. Thank you all. We are now going to move to the second part of the outdoor recreation. 4 members who represent Colorado's outdoor recreation industry and appropriate government agencies. We have 2 members who each received 5 votes, meeting the majority for the quorum, Chris Hines and Melanie Mills. We still have 2 more slots to fill. Is there any point of discussion or objection to Chris Hines or Melanie Mills? Hearing none, we will move those 2 names forward. What we do need to do is discuss 2 more slots. And again, I'm going to go down to our previous list of 12 folks. I also invite people to bring up other names they saw in the applicant folders. And I know Jennifer here can help us speak to any summaries about them. On the government side, we had people note Brian Grew, Chandon Hinton has no indication. We also had Cliff Moores, Courtney Sledge, Carrie Easterly for either housing or government, Maria Mesa, government and veteran, or Steve Nojas. And if I'm saying his name wrong and somebody knows better, please do correct me. Are there any folks who would like to nominate somebody to be considered for a vote and speak to them to be included as the other 2 members representing Colorado's outdoor rec industry and appropriate government agencies? Mr. Ortiz.
My question would be to Dora in the Gov's office if they reached out to specific adaptive sports programs. Because again, the reason why I'm asking this, just to give context, is when I ran this bill, a lot of people had something to say then when I was going to create mandates and when I was going to push to make sure we're securing actual basic access. But this list is very underwhelming, to be honest with you, because we do have executive directors like Jeff Inouye and Chelsea Elder that represents BOEC and Adaptive Adventures. So my question is about process, where they reached out to, where they invited to join this task force, because I'm not really seeing any names that represent directors that manage some pretty big programs here. If we're talking about the total impact of all adaptive sports programs and the 2 manufacturers of adaptive sports equipment, including seating, we're talking about a business that's over $20 million. So I'm just, my question is about process, where specific adaptive programs directors reached out to and invited to join this.
And Mr. Ortiz, I just want to clarify before I ask Jennifer to speak to the boards and commissions process, and Ginny, if Dora was involved. Your question is as to the overall recruitment, not specific to this subcategory of this subcommittee. Is that correct?
Correct, because I have names in the subcommittee that we could pull from, but again, none of them are directors. And what I don't want to happen, and what it's going to be frustrating for me, is when a bill is recommended and it's brought forward, is if then these directors or any of these organizations or ski country then decide they want to oppose it. So I am thinking of the future and letting everyone know and expressing my impatience how I'll be approaching it if that ends up being the case.
Understood. Let me see if I can get you some answers. Jennifer, are you able to speak to how boards and commissions approach this? And then Ginny, I don't know what Dora's role, if any, was in outreach.
Yes, so I was not part of the initial outreach, so I don't know what the first steps looked like. We did speak with people who work for and are representatives of Vail Resorts as well as Cronky Sports, among other sports and outdoor industry companies and organizations. I think Josh, though, has his hand raised if he would like to bounce off of that.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. This is Josh Wickler from the Lieutenant Governor's office. And yes, Rev Ortiz, we reached out to both the industry side as far as like, the ski industry, the outdoor industry, and I think all of the major outdoor rec organizations, the directors and other contacts that we had. Some we got responses from, some we didn't. So we encouraged a couple times for people to apply on both kind of sides of that, of the actual kind of the adaptive recreation side of it, which was very focused on disability, and the broader the operators, the owners of the companies in the outdoor space. So the one name that is on the list is Melanie Mills from Ski Country. She was the one who did apply, that I think had been one of those people that had been in the conversations last year on the bills as well.
And this is Rep Ortiz. I want to thank Josh for clarifying. So I just want the record to reflect that Dora and the Gov's office did their due diligence. And so that if in the future we hear stated otherwise, that we can reflect back to the record, because that is something that opponents consistently do when it comes to disability rights, is then trying to blame process or blame participation. And I'm trying to point out the fact that due diligence has been done. Everybody's been informed. Everybody's had the opportunity. So if that is something that is pointed out, that is invalid.
Mr. Ortiz, your point is captured. This meeting is being streamed and recorded as part of that, and we're capturing your point in the notes as well. So with that, I'm going to bring us back. We have two names that we've agreed to move forward, Chris Hines and Melanie Mills. Do we have members of the task force who would like to elevate names to be considered by this group for inclusion in our recommendations that we'll make to the Gov's office? Mr. Ortiz.
So I know Craig Towler, I think he was applying for the housing task force. There was one where we had, oh no, it's the government. There was one where we had like such a wealth of riches of applicants. And I know that he himself is involved with Paralympians. I know that he himself is involved with outdoor sports. So if he's willing to, I don't want to volunteer him to do it, but I would like to elevate his name to participate in this if he doesn't get selected for the government task force. Maybe we should start with that then. But I'm just kind of showing where I'm thinking.
I'm going to put that, and that last name was Towler. Is that Towler? Do we have other names that folks would like to propose? Mr. Stone, please.
Hi, I could speak to Rep Ortiz consideration of Craig Towler. He will be in anywhere we see best fit. And if Rep Ortiz feels strongly that he would be in this role, and I would actually agree with him, I would support him for that role.
Rep Ortiz, you had kind of informally floated his name. Do you want to make a motion that we do a roll call on him?
Yes, sir. I move that we nominate Craig Towler to be elevated for the outdoor subcommittee.
Do I have a second?
Second, Michael Stone.
Mr. Stone seconds. Do I have any objections from members of the task force? Seeing and hearing none, we have a third name, Craig Towler, pending his agreement, which it sounds like we can get. We now have three names. Would any members of the task force like to elevate a fourth name to be considered as a member who represents Colorado outdoor rec industry and appropriate government agencies.
I,
Go ahead. No,
Um,
Julie, please.
yeah, no, this is Julie. Deanna Rumsey, I don't know if she qualifies in the in that category, but I think she might have, like, in past jobs. But I thought she would be good looking at her. I mean, I know her and she's a hard worker and she shows up and she's smart. But it looked like maybe her past, like her current employment is with an advocacy organization, but her past employment was more in, it looked like some of that kind of stuff. The other person that might be really good at outdoor stuff, but again, I don't know that they fit as neatly as Mark Simon, who has done years of work on those specific issues. So I just wanted to, but again, does not represent the industry or government. So I don't know if there's, I don't know how broadly, he's done recreation stuff personally. Like I think he put in there that he organized disabled hunts, but I don't know that really counts because it's not like a company. So those were just two thoughts I had as we're looking to round this out of people that I knew, and from looking at also at their resumes or applications, looked like they had passion and knowledge in this area.
Thank you, Julie. So in addition to the two names that Ms. Reskin has elevated, and again, from the list that we had of those 12 that had been touched on earlier, which include noted as government, potentially government or outdoors, Brian Grew, Shannon Hilton, Cliff Moores, Deanna Rumsey was one there, Kari Easterly, Lindsay Ann Mandolini, Maria Mesa, and Steve Quinojas. Does anybody want to respond to the brief profiles that Julie provided on those two individuals, or do we need to ask Jennifer for further background?
I'm okay if Jennifer wants to highlight specific pieces of their background.
Definitely, I am happy to do that. So Deanna Rumsey, she is an advocacy specialist with the Independent Center. She is a strong advocate in the disability policy community and would love to be able to serve in this capacity. She has worked as a community organizing specialist for the Independent Center as well, where she was responsible for accomplishing systems of change activities at the local and state level. She was also a case manager for Colorado Access and Rocky Mountain Human Services. She was a case manager prior to that role from 2015 to 2019 with the Community Reach Center in North Glen, Colorado. There, she worked a lot with problem solving for solutions to complex issues related to housing and fundings for individuals with medical, psychiatric, and judicial co-occurring challenges. She also has worked as an autism specialist, a behavior therapist, and an occupational therapist.
Thank
and
you.
Then,
Mr. Ortiz, did you have a question? No, okay. And then Jennifer, we'll have you go on, and we'll just ask everybody, I'll remind you that we're looking for 4 members who represent Colorado's outdoor recreation industry and appropriate government agencies. Jennifer, go ahead, please.
Great, thank you. So moving on to Mark Simon. He is currently the Vice President of MDS Development Corps, doing business as Living Marine Art. He also is the co-owner and director of a firm developing software to centralize application and referral for public and private benefit programs. That the company is Basic Information Technologies. Prior to that, he founded the Rocky Mountain General Management and Services Group in Vail, Colorado. And this was a company focused on service, repairs, installation, and contracting of appliances, plumbing, heating, electrical, spas, pools, and saunas. let's see,
I-
he does have, sorry.
I know, and anyone who knows Mark will not find this surprising that his thing was like 14 pages. That's just Mark. I just had a thought, since I think like I don't think either of the people I mentioned really fit the government, but I'm wondering if Christina could be the government, could go on government, because she does have that experience, and then and then move someone else into the advocacy role. I don't know if that's possible or not, but
Mr. Ortiz, that was your original motion, and we got a second. Would you be open to amending that to move Ms. Erickson's vote to the outdoor rec industry and appropriate government agencies?
So for the fourth slot, we're looking at Ms. Erickson then? Is that the motion?
The motion would be to move her and then consider one of Ms. Reskin's other individuals, Deanna or Mark Simon, for the earlier slot on the advocacy side. Yes.
Oh, we're talking about the first four that we already approved.
Correct.
I would be opposed to that.
Okay.
For the second slot, I think we're still looking for a fourth, right? For the second group of outdoor. That's what I thought our focus was right now.
It is. There had just been the idea of whether we could move somebody from that earlier and play a little swap here, but we're still looking for a fourth person to join Chris Hines, Melanie Mills, and Craig Towler as the four members representing the outdoor rec industry and appropriate government agencies.
and I was just saying the two people I mentioned really I think I don't know that you could really stretch either of them into those slots. So
Understood. So why don't we hold those names for other and additional consideration? Do we have additional proposals of names for the fourth slot here? Mr. Ortiz.
I mean, I heard you say that Chanda Hinton expressed interest in the outdoor space. I don't know what so maybe someone else can speak to this. I don't know what her individual participation is like in the outdoor areas. I do know she's very active. I mean, she's like a rock star in the community for those that do know her. But also she's a service provider for people that are very active when it comes to alternate therapies around acupuncture, massage therapy. I know she's very active herself. So I imagine she's come across barriers when it comes to participating in outdoor spaces in Colorado. She is the caliber of person that when she does something, she goes to the nth degree and she does it right. So for those reasons, I would think about bringing her name forward. So I'm going to make the motion, that way we can discuss it. So I move that we put Chanda Hinton in that fourth slot. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay.
We have a second. And I want to welcome Kirsten Beck is now on the phone joining us. I know that thank you for joining us. I know you had
Hi, sorry about being late. Thank you for.
Not at all. And we're just going through each list. We have a first and a second to elevate Chanda Hinton for the fourth slot, looking at the outdoor recreation and the members who represent the outdoor rec industry and appropriate government agencies. Having a first and a second, do we have any objections from members of the task force?
Any discussion, any further discussion?
Yeah, can we have a discussion about how this is Jennifer Harpole, about how she meets the criteria? Does she represent Colorado's outdoor recreation industry or appropriate government agencies?
I appreciate the question, Jennifer, and to keep us as neutral for the beginning, I'm going to ask Jennifer Farrell to step in and offer us all a summary on Chanda Hinton's background.
So she is the executive director and founder of the Chanda Plan Foundation, which is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that provides integrative health programs to individuals with physical disabilities. She experienced a spinal cord injury at age 9 due to a gunshot wound. And while she could have a strong position on gun control, she has chosen instead to be an advocate for healthcare among the disabled population. She believes healthy communities are successful communities. Prior to her current role as the executive director of the Chanda Plan Foundation, she was a peer trainer with the Colorado Directed Attendance Support Services. She also was the outreach coordinator from 2012 to 2016 with the Office of Healthcare Policy and Financing. And She has worked on passing legislation in Colorado, which currently allows Colorado Medicaid to give individuals with spinal cord injuries the opportunity to participate in an 8-year pilot program that is evaluating the cost effectiveness and improved quality of life by utilizing acupuncture, massage, and chiropractic care.
Thank you, Jennifer. And as we open it back up to discussion, I'll remind folks, we're looking to identify a fourth member who represents Colorado's outdoor recreation industry and appropriate government agencies. Mr. Ortiz.
So I guess by that criteria, Jennifer brings up a good point, is she does not, but if we're talking about government agencies, Krista Erickson currently works per her resume for the city and county of Denver. So I would be willing to make a swap to move so we can be adhering to the legislation to put Christina Erickson into that slot to represent the government agency, and moving Chanda Hinton to the first 4 that we represent, because she definitely meets the criteria for the first 4.
So based on professional and personal background, we have a motion to move Christina Erickson based on employment with the city and county of Denver to the group representing government agencies, and to include Shandon Hinton in the 4 members representing the advocacy and disability community. Do we have a second to that motion from Mr. Ortiz?
Elizabeth Moran, I'll second.
Elizabeth Moran, second. Do we have any objections from members of the task force or requests for discussion on this change? Hearing none, we will make that change. We now have 4 members for each of those that we will move forward to a final roll call vote at the end. And we're now going to move to the Housing Subcommittee. Housing Subcommittee on Affordability, Accessibility, and Housing Attainability for Persons with Disabilities. The purpose of the Housing Subcommittee is to identify barriers to securing and enjoying secure, affordable, accessible, and attainable housing for persons with disabilities, and to make recommendations for addressing those barriers. As with the others, we have 2 groups where we'll be nominating 4 people each, putting forward recommendations. Group number 1, 4 members who represent disability rights advocacy organizations and veteran service organizations that serve disabled veterans. In this category, we have 2 individuals who received 4 votes, 3 individuals who received 3 votes, and 1 who received 2 votes. I'm going to first read the names of the 2 folks who received 4 votes and see if we have a motion to move them forward. Those 2 individuals receiving 4 votes are Cassidy Roberts and Aeneas Campbell. Mr. Ortiz.
I move that we recommend and approve to push them forward to be members of the subcommittee.
Do I have a second to Mr. Ortiz's motion?
I second.
Kirsten Beck seconds. Members of the task force, are there any requests for discussion or any objections to moving
Yes.
Cassidy? Ms. Reskin.
Yeah, I just, I don't know Anais Campbell, and so I don't have a particular problem, but it looks like she's an advocate right now for like the last year, but her background seems much more in being a service provider, and I just wanted to make sure that because there were a couple other people that really represented and have a long history of representing disability organizations. So I was just wondering if there was any thoughts about that. And again, I don't object to her as a person because I don't know her, and I know that she is with an advocacy organization right now. I just wanted to raise that.
Yep, and Ms. Moran, it looked like you had your hand up. Did you want to speak to?
I did, and I too don't know Aeneas or Anise. And full transparency, I did not get an opportunity to vote. The links came out while I was traveling. I wasn't home until very, very late on Wednesday night and had a full plate yesterday. And I certainly thank the DOOR staff who did eventually send me they followed up with links that I could use, and I just did not get an opportunity to vote. So I just want to put this out here live on the floor just for consideration. I see on the list of applicants that did not specify a subcommittee, a couple of names that I think would be really good on this particular category, and they do represent a disability rights advocacy organization, in particular, Carrie Easterly, who has been working in this field, and I see Julie just gave a thumbs up. Since I didn't get a chance to vote on paperwork, I just wanted to lift her name up to see if anyone might have some interest in Carrie Easterly being considered for this particular category. She's the executive director of the ARC of Adams County. She has been in a position advocating for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and cross disabilities for over 23 years. She's been both an advocate, boots on the ground person, and she's also held leadership positions where making really tough decisions about policy and best practice, and works with a population in Adams County where housing is a real issue. So I would just like to lift her name up for consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Moran. And hearing some questions about Anais Campbell, I'm going to revise the question that I posed and limit it to Cassidy Roberts. Would anybody, Mr. Ortiz, would you like to move Cassidy Roberts forward alone, and we can come back and revisit Anais Campbell?
Okay. So I'm going to withdraw my motion to this because that's what we have to do for points of order, to move both of them, and instead just move that we approve Cassidy Roberts.
Second.
Second from Ms. Reskin. Do I have any objections from members of the task force to moving Cassidy Roberts forward? Hearing none, we'll move Cassidy Roberts forward. I'm going to, and Ms. Moran, I'm going to include the discussion of Carrie Easterly along with 4 other names, and we'll see if anybody would like to discuss or move any of these forwards. We had Jennifer Kucera, Jennifer Oakes, and Rochelle Miller. Each received 3 votes. Kelly McCullough received 2 votes, and we have a nomination for Carrie Easterly from Ms. Moran. Would anybody like to discuss or offer thoughts on any of those before I ask for any motions? Ms. Reskin.
Thank you. Yeah, I totally agree with what Elizabeth said about Carrie Easterly. She's fantastic. She's very thoughtful. She's a very good person, I think, to have on a committee, especially one where things might get tense, which will happen in housing. She's, again, like really, really solid. She's someone I always want in the room in these kinds of discussions because she's a good advocate, but she's level-headed. Like more than I am, quite frankly, like a lot more than I am. She's really good. I would want to just, Rochelle Miller is also someone who's strong, who represents really the whole of the independent living centers because she has a leadership role there. And she's the one that really led the charge, really helped the people that were victimized by abusive landlord that made a bunch of significantly disabled people in Greeley homeless. She's the one that like jumped right in and really found solutions. And I was really, really impressed with the housing navigation and advocacy that she had set up in her organization in Greeley. So and I know it wasn't on the thing, it's just something I happen to know. I think most people here probably know what I'm talking about. There was a provider that should have never been allowed to work in our state who basically made a bunch of significantly disabled people homeless for their profit.
Yeah.
And she was the rising star that stood to the top to really help people. So I'd be good with either of those two. And they're both, Rochelle and Carrie, are people that, again, when they show up 100%, and they're strong, hard workers.
Mr. Ortiz.
Great. And I hear that, Julie, and I like leaning that way, definitely. I just also want to go back and make a case for Anais, and like, again, I feel like my role here as the only or one of the few people of color in this room, maybe on the committee, is to advocate for people that represent different demographics. And Anais is a woman of color. She's worked for Latino organizations. So I feel like even though she's a little bit newer, that we need to work a little bit harder to make sure that we're bringing some diversity into these committees and to these voices as well. Because not only will she be considering basic access, but then affordability with that access when it comes to the communities that we're serving.
Thank you, Mr. Ortiz. And I'm hearing advocacy for Anais Campbell, Rochelle Miller, and Carrie Easterly. I'll also remind that we have the names who received votes of Jennifer Kucera, Jennifer Oakes, and Kelly McCullough. I'll ask members of the task force, and because these are all separate, I'm going to ask for individual names rather than groups. Does anybody want to put forward a motion for any of these individuals to be included on our list? Mr. Ortiz.
I have a question for Julie first. If you were to prioritize between Easterly and Miller, who would you play? How would you prioritize that?
Wow,
I know that's tough, but you know.
it is. I think Easterly.
Okay.
Just because of more experience. And I'm not 100% sure that Rochelle Miller does identify as white or not. I just don't know. I'm just thinking of some conversations I've had, but I don't know, so I'm not going to speak to that. But Easterly has more experience.
Then go ahead, Elizabeth.
Barrick, are you entertaining a motion to elevate the list of folks that you
If
just?
somebody would like to make one, yes, but I also
would
leave it open for questions and clarification as we just had.
You bet. I would motion to raise Carrie Easterly up to the list.
I second that.
Second by Mr. Ortiz. Members of the task force, are there any objections to elevating Carrie Easterly as our second so far member for the Housing Subcommittee representing advocacy organizations and veteran orgs? Seeing and hearing none, we now have two names, Carrie Easterly and Cassidy Roberts. Still on the table for discussion, Rochelle Miller, Anais Campbell, Jennifer Kucera, Jennifer Oakes, and Kelly McCullough. Would anybody like to make any motions or ask any questions on any of these folks? Mr. Ortiz?
I just want to make a point of order, just kind of a question for clarification. Because full disclosure, the four people that I supported were Anais Campbell, Jennifer Kucera, Cassidy Roberts, and Jennifer Oakes. And part of it, because I'm trying to look for a mix of a team, right? People that live with a disability, people that live with different lived experiences, people that could represent a legal background. So for what names we have, my ask for the rest of the members on these committees is also to try and consider living with a disability, not just working for us. That would be an area that I want to consider. Different demographics, that would be another area I want to consider. Legal background as well, if they have, because this is going to be something that is going to be very legalistic. So just to kind of consider that as well. So that's the point of clarification that I want to move forward when we're considering these names.
Thank you, Mr. Ortiz, and I'll open it back to the floor. If there's questions, points of clarification, points about any member or any motions to advance a third and or fourth member.
This is Julie. Can you clarify how many more we have?
Absolutely. We currently have agreed on Cassidy Roberts and Carrie Easterly to advance.
Okay.
Other names still
So we
here.
have two more.
We have two more, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Does Easterly live with a disability? Does anybody know, visible or invisible?
If she does,
She doesn't
I'm not
self-identify.
aware of it. Yeah,
Got
I don't, I've never heard her identify herself that way, so.
Okay. Well, I would like to ask that we consider someone that does. So from those names that are considered.
Rochelle does, and as does Jennifer Oakes, I know for a fact. Rochelle Miller does live with a disability.
This is Rep. Ortiz. Julie, if you were to pick between Rochelle and Oakes, prioritize, not pick between. Sorry. Again, I hate this wording, and I know we're making tough decisions because we love all of these people. But if you were to prioritize between those two, and Elizabeth, same goes to you if you know them personally as well.
If it's about,
I mean, disability with the whole package now. Like if both of them live with a disability, who's going to bring the whole package?
Julie, I'm going to
yeah,
defer to you
go
on
ahead.
this just because because you've known folks longer than I have and certainly have had more interaction with them both on a personal level probably and a professional level.
well, I mean, I think what Jennifer will bring is like that lived experience of like someone, like particularly around being a wheelchair user, of like someone like in the room, because sometimes that like being there is important. And
Mhm.
so like she'll bring that, and she's a very good spokesperson. I think in terms of being able to understand the policy and jockey with a lot of moving parts, I think Rochelle has more experience, and Rochelle has kind of been in some of those power dynamics, has had to negotiate that more. So that's that's what I'm wrestling with. And so I think it's, if we're looking at rounding out the team.
I think I
And
would,
Rochelle lives, this is Rep. Ortiz, just to be clear, Rochelle lives with a disability as well.
Yes, but it's not,
Okay.
it's not a physical, not a visible, it is physical, but it's not a wheelchair user, if that's what you're asking.
Understood. I mean, the requirement doesn't have to be a wheelchair user.
No,
I
I
just want someone
understand.
that's a member of that lives with a physical disability where
Yeah.
barriers and accommodations and access are. Go ahead,
Yes.
Elizabeth. Sorry.
oh, that's okay. No, the more I'm thinking about it, I was just reviewing some of their application materials. And one of the things that I think would have me leaning a little bit more toward Miss Miller is that not just the disability, but also because she is an executive director of a nonprofit for independent living. And because we're talking about housing here, I just think she might be a tad more connected that direction. So that's where I felt.
I don't want to read too much into body language, but Mr. Ortiz, I see you responding. Did you want to ask a question in order to make a motion?
I'm going to make a motion that we recommend Rochelle Miller to be the third member of this subcommittee.
Do I have a second for Rochelle Miller? Elizabeth Moran, I saw your hand up first. Members of the task force, are there any objections to Rochelle Miller as the third member for our housing subcommittee? Seeing and hearing none, we will add Rochelle Miller. We now need to see if we can find a fourth member before we move on to industry and government agencies. Names still on this list, and we're still open to additional names, but names on the list: Anais Campbell, Jennifer Kucera, Jennifer Oakes, and Kelly McCullough. Would anybody like to speak to any one of these or make a motion? Mr. Ortiz.
My consideration again, like not just because even though they're new, that they still work with an advocate organization, but I just feel like, I mean, we saw on Saturday Night Live getting picked on for being so not very diverse when they were making fun of Coach Prime. I think that we should really seriously consider including a woman of color that also advocates, even if she is a little bit on the newer side, and give her an opportunity to show that she's going to be a disability rights champion, but also whether she likes it or not, she's going to represent the demographic of having worked with a Latino organization and being a woman of color. So I'm not making a motion, but I want the group to consider that and defer to y'all to think about who you want to move for that last slot.
Julie, please, Ms. Reskin.
I think to what Rep. Ortiz said, if she is kind of in that place of wanting to advance, like there'll be a couple experienced nonprofit EDs that might be good mentor. Again, it's not our job to handle that, but that I always looking at who's our next generation. So that when you were talking, that's what I leaned to, was looking at a whole team.
So hearing that, then I'm going to go ahead and make the motion to nominate Anais Campbell as our fourth member of this subcommittee.
Do I have a second for Ms. Campbell? Julie Reskin with the second. Members of the task force, the motion on the table is to make Anais Campbell our fourth member for the four members who represent disability rights advocacy orgs and veterans organizations. Is there any objections? Seeing and hearing none, we will add Ms. Anais Campbell. We now have four members that we'll move forward here. We move on now to four members who represent the Colorado housing industry and appropriate government agencies. Ms. Moran.
Just a point of clarification, Mr. Abramson, would you reread our four members for that first category for the housing subcommittee?
I'm happy to. Cassidy Roberts, Anais Campbell, Rochelle Miller, and Carrie Easterly.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. As we move into the four members, and this is again for the housing subcommittee, as we move into the four members who represent the Colorado housing industry and appropriate government agencies, we do have two members who have received large majorities of 5 votes. By my understanding of the rules we've gone by now, we move these two forward, but I will open it up to the group if there's objections. Two members receiving 5 votes representing the industry or appropriate government agencies are Paul Brady and Brian Rosbert. Do we have any questions or objections about these two? Jennifer Harple.
Jennifer Harple. Could you just give a brief summary? I can't access all of their documents, so.
I cannot, but I will tag in Jennifer Farrell. Yeah, I will tag in Jennifer Farrell to give us a quick background on Paul Brady and Brian Rosbert.
So Paul Brady, he is principal at Godin Sudic Architects. He was previously a project manager at Artemesia. Excuse me, I'm not pronouncing that correctly. He also worked as an architectural intern and a civil engineering intern prior to working full-time in architecture. He is a member of the American Institute of Architects. He is the past chairperson of Denver AIA Housing Committee. He was also a member of the HBA Denver Government Affairs Committee, and he has been a member of Housing Colorado as well, and a member of Steering Committee Design by Communities Design, and a member of the Candlelights Design Review Committee.
Thank you. And could you also cover Brian Rosbert for us?
Yes. Brian Rosbert is the executive director of Housing Colorado. And he does not have a resume attached to his application, but he wishes to serve on one of the subcommittees because the housing challenges facing people with disabilities are many. As the organization representing the affordable housing industry in Colorado, Housing Colorado brings expertise and experience that can help inform the solutions that the Subcommittee on Housing will bring to the larger task force. He believes that these challenges will necessitate collaboration and creativity, and he is committed to working on this.
Thank you, Jennifer. Hearing those, Representative Ortiz.
So I think it's going to be valuable to have an architect. I'm just going to say that right off the top, because that was a huge part of the discussion. Again, for those that weren't there, this is context around the housing bill that I tried to bring forward that got relegated to a task force. So I think it's going to be really valuable that we do have an architect on the team.
Other members of the task force, clarifying questions or any objections, given these two each have 5 votes to move forward?
I saw Julie with her hand up. So Julie,
Thank
if
you
you
very
want,
much.
and then I see Mike after Julie.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't necessarily have an objection. I just know I totally agree about the architect thing, but I just noticed that Paul Brady is also an architect. So again, I don't have, a particular objection. It looks like he's worked in some rural areas. If I'm reading this right, some in Denver. I thought I saw something in Vail, and also that something about high density, which I know is something that the governor's interested in. But again, I as long as there's an architect, I think that's very important.
Thank you, Ms. Ruskin. Mr. Stone.
Thank you, Michael Stone speaking. It's more of a question. Does Mr. Brady also identify with having a disability?
Didn't say. I couldn't see that. I don't think so, but I don't know.
Thank
because
you.
I don't know him personally.
And not being responsive to your question, Mr. Stone, but just to remind the group, we're looking at 4 members who represent the Colorado housing industry and appropriate government agencies.
Understood. Thank you.
This is Kirsten Beck. I have a quick question. So I know we've talked about those folks. Are we trying to vote on those two? I have a candidate I'm very interested in making sure does move forward.
Yeah.
So I wasn't totally clear how we were
No,
going with
I
it.
appreciate that, Kirsten, and I know you missed some of the original conversation. What we've tried to do is see where we had candidates that had majority votes. In this case, these two each had 5, whether everybody wanted to move them forward, and then we address other candidates and open slots, but we can take this as you all feel good. And Mr. Ortiz, I see your hand up.
I'm gonna make a motion then to move Paul Brady, because we've already said we need an architect. And then we can like discuss Kirsten or other people's potential candidates. But I think
that's
based
great.
on the
Thank you.
based on the background we've heard, I think it's real critical that we fulfill that piece. So I'm gonna make a motion that we move forward and approve Paul Brady.
Do I have a second to Mr. Brady's nomination? Mr.
I say second
Stone
by
is,
Michael Stone. Yep.
Mr. Stone seconds. Members of the task force, are there any objections to moving Paul Brady forward? Seeing and hearing none, we'll move Mr. Brady forward. I'm going to read the other names, and then Kirsten, I want to come back to you because you had some additional. We have Brian Rosbert, who Jennifer just spoke to us about. We have Shelley Marquez, who received 4 votes. Karen Kallenberg, who received 3 votes. And we'll open it up to the floor. We also have the original 12 names I shared at the top. Brian Grew, Chandon Hilton, Chandon, we've been nominated somewhere. Cliff.
Anybody else lose Barrick, or is it just me that lost Barrick audio?
Yep, lost him as well.
Am I back on? Can you hear me now?
There you are. Yep.
Yes.
Okay, AirPod's not liking me. Just running through these, we had additional names. We had David Boland, who had a housing by their name, Terry Easterly, and again, Steve Nohas. But back on this list, we've got Shelley Marquez and Karen Kallenberg. If anybody would like to speak to any of them or bring any new names to the table.
So this is Kirsten Beck. I'd like to wholeheartedly recommend Shelley Marquez. She is the president of the Mountain West region of Mercy Housing. That's one of our largest affordable housing providers. She is also a woman of color, which I think is important as well. But I've worked with her on a number of projects, and I think she would be at a tremendous asset to what it is that they're doing. They're actually working through this, obviously, on a daily basis, but they go above and beyond to make sure that they're really serving our community. And I, with how forward thinking she is, I just think that this entire task force would benefit from her expertise.
Thank you. Mr. Ortiz.
I second that because she was number 1 on my list. So,
and I want to clarify because I heard the word second. Kirsten, was that a motion to move Shelley Marquez forward?
Yes, that sounds great. She definitely deserves it. We're all going to learn a lot from her. I'm certain of that.
And Mr. Ortiz, can I take your words of second as a second to the motion?
I second that motion.
Motion being seconded. Members of the task force, are there any objections to moving Shelley Marquez forward along with Paul Brady as the second member representing the housing industry and government agencies? Seeing and hearing none, we have 2 names. We also still have Brian Rosbert and Karen Kallenberg, who received votes, and any open nominations from members of the task force for names to be considered. Would anybody like to raise an additional name or elevate a name from our list of those who did not specify a subcommittee? Seeing no new names, would anybody like to speak to either Brian Rosbert or Karen Kallenberg? Ms. Reskin.
Yeah, I don't know Karen personally, but my understanding is that Habitat has a pretty good reputation, and that they do a lot of stuff for low income. So again, I don't know her personally, but I just wanted to raise that.
Mr. Ortiz.
And I think it might be important to elevate them. This is not yet a motion. I just want people to consider this, is that when we were moving forward with the original bill, we did make a carve out for organizations like Habitat that specifically construct a home to the person that's going to be, or the family that's going to be living in it. And so the reason they were pushing for a carve out is if that family includes someone with a disability, of course, they're going to make it accessible. If it doesn't, so just as a way to make sure we're not harming the mission of Habitat for Humanity, since they already go out of their way to construct homes for specific individuals or family in mind. So just to consider that if we're thinking about elevating Karen as well.
Would anybody else like to speak to Karen or make any motions? Mr. Ortiz.
Seeing none, just in the process of moving things forward in a timely manner, I move that we elevate Karen Kellenberg to the committee.
Do I have a second to Mr. Ortiz's motion? Ms. Moran seconds. Members of the task force, any objections to Karen Kallenberg moving forward on the housing subcommittee? Seeing and hearing none, we'll move her forward. We now have 3 members. We do need a fourth, or I should clarify, we have the option to include a fourth. Would anybody like to propose a name to be our fourth recommendation representing the Colorado housing industry and appropriate government agencies? Mr. Ortiz.
Eric, from who we have left, who are the next 2 that received the most votes from who we have left?
We have gone through those who received votes other than Brian Rosberg, who did receive 5 votes, who Jennifer shared us some background on.
Okay. Would there be any objection for me in the interest of time moving forward, Brian Rosberg, since he received the most number of votes? All right, seeing people shake their heads. So I'm going to make a motion that we move to make Brian Rosberg the final member of this subcommittee.
Do we have a second to Mr. Ortiz's motion? Jennifer Harpole seconds. Members of the task force, any objections to Brian Rosberg being our 4th member? Seeing and hearing none, we have 4, and we're moving on to the final subcommittee. I do recognize we're down to 10 minutes. I'm going to try to move us along. I hope folks can stick through the time we need. Going on to this government subcommittee on physical and programmatic basic access within state and local government for persons with disabilities. In the first category, 4 members who represent disability rights advocacy organizations and veteran service organizations that serve veterans with disabilities. We do have 4 members who received 3 votes, 1 who received 2 votes. I'll read first those members who received 3 votes and see if anybody would like to either speak to, ask questions, or make any motions. Receiving 3 votes were Shannon Callahan, Jack Johnson, Rosalie Vetter-Bischel, and Mark Simon. I believe that did we put Mark Simon somewhere else? No. I apologize. I'm just scrolling back through my notes. So we have Shannon Callahan, Jack Johnson, Rosalie Vetter-Bischel, and Mark Simon having received 3 votes. Would anybody like to speak to any of them? Mr. Ortiz.
So Jack Johnson for sure would be my number 1 choice and was my number 1 choice here. And that's because not only did he work on the original housing task force bill, he has a law background. He works for Disability Law Colorado. So that's going to be an important part of the task force here. But he's been involved in so many other pieces of legislation when it comes to basic access that he would be a tremendous asset and support for this. So unless there's any objections with that in mind, I'm going to move that we approve Jack Johnson for the subcommittee.
Ms. Ruskin, is that a second with your thumbs up? And I think a third from Mr. Stone. Members of the task force, any objections to moving Jack Johnson forward? Seeing and hearing none, we'll move Jack Johnson forward. Would anybody like to speak to Shannon Callahan, Rosalie Vetter-Bischel, or Mark Simon?
I know Mark Simon well. I can speak to him.
Please, Ms. Ruskin.
He's been active in disability rights for many, many years. He was the prime mover of the I can't remember which one, but a few CADAs ago. He's also done a lot of stuff on like park access as well as parking, and like looking at the difference of like what's statewide concern, what's local. So he has a lot of history and a lot of background.
Thank you.
And he's a person with a visible disability.
Thank you for that background, Ms. Ruskin. Any questions about Mr. Simon, or would anybody like to make any motion related to Mr. Simon? Ms. Ruskin.
I will move him.
Motion to move Mark Simon forward. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second from Mr. Ortiz. Members of the task force, do we have any objections to moving Mark Simon as our second member together with Jack Johnson on the government subcommittee? Seeing and hearing none, we'll move Mark Simon. We still have Shannon Callahan and Rosalie Vetter-Bichel, who received 3 votes, and Ty Smith, who received 2 votes. And any other members that you'd like to bring forward to refill our 2 remaining slots for 4 members who represent disability rights advocacy organizations and veteran service orgs. Ms. Moran. You're muted, ma'am.
Thank you. I would like to elevate Jill Pidcock for consideration. I see she's on the list. She's an executive director of the Arc of Central Mountains. She represents the intellectual and developmental disability community out there. She's also has a lot of expertise in development, community relations, but particularly for this the government subcommittee, she's also been heavily involved in programs that help, for instance, first responders with communication and effective communication engagement. And she's really sort of been a force to reckon with, looking outward around government relations, particularly around law enforcement, emergency preparedness, those sorts of things. Is considered certainly an expert in her field.
Before I open it to motions, Mr. Ortiz, yes.
Yep, I did consider her, and like now I'm going to give it new weight since you're considering. I just want to remind everyone we have 2 slots. So this, for me now, it's going to turn into a game. If not this person, then that person, then why? So just want to, so in the running, in the consideration, but I also want to, because the other 2 that were high on my list were Shannon Callahan, Rose Bichel, and Teresa Wynn. And Teresa Wynn was up there because of her experience on the federal level. She has experience working for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. And she lives with a disability, and she represents community that is other than white. So just
members of the task force, we have heard words in favor of Jill Pidcock, Teresa Wynn, Rosalie Vetter-Bichel, and I believe those are, and Shannon Callahan. Would anybody like to speak to or ask questions about any of those before we open it up to motions?
This is Julie. It appears that Shannon is deaf, and we don't have anyone who's deaf. And I think particularly around government and the way they've been kept out due to language access, I just, that, but, and again, I'm not, I think that's, I think that she's deaf. I don't know her personally. I do know Teresa, and she's great too. So someone else do the who do you want question, not me this time.
Mr. Ortiz.
So then I'll put to the group, if they need a minute to look at their bios, or if they want their bios to be read, I've got like a million tabs and windows open on LinkedIn and what the Ghost Office provided. So again, my top 3 now for the last 2 slots, and Elizabeth has a lot to do with this too, are between Jill, Teresa, and Shannon. And so I'm going to ask the task force, and you guys can offer whoever else you want to, but if you had to pick between those 3, how would you choose to number them or prioritize them? And I guess something to consider too is the experience that Jill brings already represented, or is the experience that Teresa would bring already represented, or is the experience Shannon brings already represented? Because we're talking about these individuals working as a team too.
Would anybody like to speak to any of these individuals, Shannon Callahan, Jill Pidcock, or Teresa Wynn, including the lens through which Mr. Ortiz has asked us to consider things? Ms. Moran.
I'm Julie. The name of the individual who identifies as the person with a hearing impairment. Who is that individual again?
It's Shannon.
It's Shannon. Okay.
Mr. Ortiz. Go ahead.
One more point of order. Is there any way we can kind of do what we did last time? And because we have 3 great candidates, is there one that qualifies for the second subset that we might then consider for that?
Yeah. And let me read the second subset, because in that place, we do only have 2 folks who received votes. Our second subset will be 4 members who represent state and local government.
Could we,
Ms. Reskin.
This is Julie. Can we move Teresa to government? Teresa Wynn. I mean, I don't think she's representing a specific government, but she's worked in government most of her life and most of her career. and she can certainly represent that government perspective. I don't know how literal that is, but
Yeah, and I'm going to come back to Mr. Ortiz. We've tried to stick pretty true to the legislative intent of those who represent, but Mr. Ortiz, your thoughts?
So just looking at her background from her resume, she's got experience. Her most recent experience is curriculum developer with UC Anschutz Medical Campus. Director of Community Living Equity Center is actually the most recent. That's what she's doing right now.
that's government.
Yeah. So if we consider working for the Director of Community Living Equity Center, or is that a nonprofit organization? Like, that's what we got to consider. Like, does this strictly meet the
And as I'm here to facilitate rather than opine on whether it meets the
I'm happy
definition.
to, as an attorney, opine on that. I would
Thank you.
totally consider her background to qualify as state or local government. That's broad enough. I think that's totally fine.
Thank you, Kirsten. Mr. Ortiz.
Then I would make a motion, given that we select Jill Bidock and, excuse me if I'm mispronouncing their names, and Shannon Callahan for the last 2 slots on this committee. And built into this motion, picking Teresa Nguyen to represent the first slot for the government.
Ms. Reskin, is that a second of Mr. Ortiz's motion? That Ms. Reskin seconds. Members of the task force, the motion before you is to move Jill Bidock and Shannon Callahan forward and to move Teresa Nguyen down to our discussion about members of the government. Do any members object to this motion? Seeing and hearing none, we now have 4 members for this, and we are on to our final one. I'm going to tell you we're going to be about 5 minutes over, and I hope folks can stick with us. I'll move as quickly. 4 members who represent state and local government. We have Allison Butler with 4 votes, William Buck with 3, and Teresa Nguyen, who we just discussed. Would anybody like to discuss, offer thoughts, or make a motion related to any 1, 2, or 3 of these? Mr. Ortiz.
Let's go ahead and make it official and move Teresa Nguyen to take the first slot of this subcommittee.
Do I have a second to Ms. Nguyen? Ms. Reskin seconds. Members of the task force, any objections? Seeing and hearing none, Teresa Nguyen will be our first. We have 3 slots to fill. We have Allison Butler and William Buck, who received 4 and 3 votes respectively. And we still have our list of those who did not specify a subcommittee, including Brian Grew, Cliff Moores, Courtney Sledge, David Bolin, Kerry Easterly, Maria Mesa, and Steve Nohas. Those are the folks who indicated government. Ms. Reskin.
Yeah, I would I would strongly move Allison Butler. She's fantastic. And I would also move Cliff Moores. He runs the Commission of the Deaf, Hard of Hearing, and Deaf Blind.
Is that a motion for those 2, Ms. Reskin?
It is. And I don't have anything against William Buck. I just don't know him, but
Understood. We have a motion for Allison Butler and Cliff Moores as our 4 members who represent local and state government on the government subcommittee. Do I have a second? Mr. Ortiz seconds. Members of the task force on Allison Butler and Cliff Moores. Any objections?
Can we get more discussion on Cliff Moores? Because I don't know him, or again, brain injury, so maybe I do know him, but I don't realize that I know him. I mean, Allison Butler was number 1 on my list here, so definitely no issues with that. But if someone wants to speak a little bit more, and Julie already did. So if anybody else knows him that wants to speak for him, or if the Gov's office wants to jump into his background a little bit.
Yeah, why don't we hold this motion? And Jennifer Farrell, if you could give us a little more on Cliff Moores for members of the task force.
Definitely, thank you. Sorry, his application is just loading on my end. So he is listed as a director at the Colorado Department of Human Services. He has a background in finance, fundraising, and grants. He served as a project manager of annual budgets, and he also has a background in human resources and leadership administration. He currently works in marketing and public relations, it looks like, and he has a history of employment with the Colorado Commission for the Deaf, Hard of Hearing, and Deaf Blind. He has also worked for Definitely Possible Resources as a owner and then as a consultant. He has also worked in communication services for the deaf as well. yes, he has a majority of his professional background is working with the deaf community. He worked with the Rocky Mountain Deaf School as the founder and president and CEO about 20 years ago. And he has also worked for the Marion Downs National Center for Infant Hearing.
Thank you, Jennifer. Again, we're on the Government Subcommittee on Physical and Programmatic Basic Access. 4 members who represent local and state government. We have an initial motion to move Allison Butler and Cliff Moores forward. Are there further questions of clarification, or does anybody want to second that motion?
I already seconded it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ortiz. It's been seconded. Does anybody want to ask clarifying questions before we go to a committee vote on this? Or task force, excuse me. Members of the task force, then. We have a motion for Allison Butler and Cliff Moores to join Teresa Nguyen, making 3 of our 4 members. Do I hear any objections? Seeing and hearing none, we will move Allison Butler and Cliff Moores forward. At this point, we have 1 slot left to fill. We have William Buck, who received 3 votes, or other members who you'd like to elevate. Would any members like the task force like to make a motion or elevate a voice or name?
Since I'm not seeing anybody chime in, I'm going to go ahead and make the motion in the interest of time. And since we already voted to have Will Buck fill in the last slot for this task force.
Do we have a second to Mr. Buck? Ms. Reskin seconds Mr. Ortiz's motion. William Buck to be our 4th name on this list. Members of the task force, any objections? Okay, what I'm going to do then is I'm going to read quickly through all of the names and go through a roll call vote. Quickly go to public comment, and we'll get you out of here. I appreciate everybody's patience. Coming back to our outdoors subcommittee, representing the Adaptive Outdoor Rec and Advocacy Oregon veterans, we have Curtis Garrett, Sharon Campbell, John Broadman, and Shandon Hilton. Representing Colorado's outdoor rec industry and government agencies, Chris Hines, Melanie Mills, Craig Towler, and Christina Erickson. On our housing subcommittee, representing the disability rights advocacy orgs and veteran service organizations, we have Cassidy Roberts, Aeneas Campbell, Rochelle Miller, and Carrie Easterly. For members representing the housing industry and appropriate government agencies, we have Paul Brady, Brian Rosbert, Shelley Marquez, and Karen Kallenberg. For this final one we're discussing on government, representing the disability rights advocacy organizations and veteran service orgs, Shannon Callahan, Jack Johnson, Mark Simon, and Jill Pickup. 4 members representing local and state government, as we just discussed, Allison Butler, Cliff Moores, William Buck, and Teresa Nguyen. To formalize that these will be all of our recommendations, we're going to do a roll call vote. Mr. Stone, on the moving all of these names forward.
Yes.
Mr. Stone, yes. Representative Ortiz.
Yes.
Representative Ortiz, yes. Jennifer Harpole.
Yes.
Ms. Harpole, yes. Elizabeth Moran.
Yes.
Representative Armagost.
Yes.
Mr. Armagost, yes. Ms. Reskin.
Yes.
Ms. Reskin, yes. And Kirsten Beck.
Yes.
Ms. Beck, yes. By unanimous vote, we will move all of these names forward. Before I let everybody go, and again, I appreciate your time, do we have any members of the public who would like to make a comment? Seeing and hearing none, I will thank you all very much and turn it to Mr. Ortiz to adjourn us.
Just one last, again, we don't have time, but I want to keep in mind that we help the subcommittee members frame what they're here to do. I think we should kind of create like an intro packet that we give to them as far as reminding them what the mission or the task of the task force was per state statute. And I think there should be some work going into legally defining what basic access is, and then also what's listed in the legislation, and then also discussing and having a discussion around what ableism is. Because what I think that'll facilitate true discussion and true understanding, because what I don't want to happen is for 2 camps to form and be entrenched in what they're doing and not be speaking the same language to try and get to a solution. Again, the goal of this task force is very clear. How we get there is not. That's why we're electing these members to do that. But you have to have, it has to be couched in the mission statement of this piece of legislation, and also what the most marginalized, which are the community living with a disability, go through every day and to clearly define what basic access is and what ableism is to kind of frame the work they're doing. So that's my only ask moving forward. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and adjourn us. I really appreciate everyone's time. Adjourned.
Thank you all.